Claire Wasserman. Welcome to Jewish Money Matters. It's so great to have you on the show.
Yay. Thank you so much for having me. I'm
I'm
excited to be
so
here.
excited for this juicy combo. As I was digging into, prepping for this conversation, I went on the Instagram rabbit hole and I found out, before we even get into the topic of your latest book and your work, funny story. You were casted for Broadway because you looked Puerto Rican. And there I'm like, oh, but I'm Puerto Rican. And then
I'm
there's the
sorry.
story.
I'm sorry it wasn't you when you were 9.
Right? Because I hear you got fired, which probably has had some impact on your money story, which we'll get to soon.
Yes, and it actually had a positive impact on my money story, believe it or not. Very long story short, I had gone to theater camp, was scouted and asked to audition for, this was 1996, Paul Simon has one musical. It was called The Cape Man. And they were looking for people who, kids who looked Puerto Rican. And I'm, pretty dark. And I guess I kind of looked it and did a good job. That's a whole other story of how I actually didn't do a good job, but I was so funny in my audition. I ended up getting it for my personality, not my singing. So don't ask me to do that. Long story short, they eventually, before we went on Broadway, they fired everybody in the cast who was not of Hispanic origin. Now, of course, that is discrimination. And I was part of the union. I was part of Actors Equity. I was, working enough hours, making enough money. And they brought a class action lawsuit. Now, of course, I wasn't aware of this at the time. I was 9. And in that class action lawsuit, which they claimed racial discrimination, which of course is sort of mind blowing, right? Because I'm a white person,
right?
But technically, again, still racial discrimination. They won, and that's where the positive money story comes in, because the little pot of money that they won ended up paying for a lot of my college.
Really?
So I think I don't know if I would have made more money or less money if I had actually stayed in the show and gone on to Broadway. I don't know, but it also didn't do well. The show only lasted, I think, for 2 weeks on Broadway. It was a huge flop. However, in recent years, there's been a revival. I think they did it, Shakespeare in the Park. It's coming back. So The Cape Man, I think it's great. I have no hard feelings. Again, don't it's not like they brought me to a room and fired me. Like that happened later on in my career when I was fired from adult jobs.
A real thing.
But yeah, no, there was money that did come out of it. And
nice.
thank you to Boston University, because that's where I went and I paid for it.
Wait, you went to BU?
I did, yes.
I went to Tufts. Oh, I went to Tufts just around the corner, sort
of.
Yeah,
I didn't get into Tufts, so congratulations.
It's okay. I didn't get into Harvard.
Okay, yeah, there you go. Yeah, the other Boston school. Yeah.
Wow, how funny. All right. So let's talk about your work. You're the founders of Ladies Get Paid, the author of a book right behind you. Beautiful book, same title, speaker, podcast host. You're on a mission, Claire, to empower women to advocate for themselves and beyond, really, and in a way that directly impacts their bank account. My first question is, I have a suspicion the answer is yes, but I want you to take us behind the scenes. And my question is, was there a personal impetus behind this? Take us to your why behind this line of work.
Sure. So the context is I never really considered myself a feminist per se. I had no idea what feminism meant. I mean, I vaguely knew some things, like my mom was the 3rd class of women in college. But, by the time I went to school, women were 60% of college students. I just felt like, okay, it's done. We're equal. Now, of course, It's a very privileged way of looking at this, but didn't enter into the workforce thinking that I was going to be discriminated against. And here's the thing. I never experienced anything really drastic until a few years ago that made me think back on, wow, actually, I think I did experience a lot. I just didn't have the vocabulary for it. So the aha moment, or I guess the first aha moment in a series of them, was going to the south of France to an advertising festival. I was there with my old company, the company that I worked for, and this guy comes up to me and he says, "Hi, now whose wife are you?" Well, certainly not his. I was there on business, and it was this full week of just these constant interactions where I felt uncomfortable. I was either being objectified or not even being talked to or looked at, and this exhaustion that happened. And after the week, I wrote an essay I didn't publish, but I wrote an essay reflecting on not just the experience of that week, but throughout my entire career, the often uncomfortable gender power dynamics that happened, and never, having the vocabulary like microaggressions, like that is a word, where you can experience discrimination in very subtle ways that end up having a really profound impact on your self-esteem, and all of the energy that I was spending navigating those things was energy that I wasn't spending putting towards myself and my own career growth. I shared the essay with some friends and they were like, oh my gosh, me too. By the way, this was probably 2015. They shared it with their friends. Me too, right? So it's sort of me too before me too. And I'm watching my, essay effectively go viral in my inbox. And I didn't know what to do with it other than it just sparked interest in understanding women in the workplace, women in money, and began to uncover really depressing statistics, 55 cents to the dollar. That's how much Hispanic women are making compared to white women, okay? And the leadership gap, 22% of women make it past middle management. The funding gap, less than 1% of VC funding goes to Black women. The list goes on. And I'm thinking to myself, what can I do? It's systemic, it's overwhelming. As an individual, literally what can I do on Monday to combat these things short of quitting my job and becoming an activist? And I'm not going to do that. I have to make my own income, right? It took a full year until Ladies Get Paid, the real Ladies Get Paid, started to happen. And it was actually when a friend came to me and said that she had just realized that she was charging so much less than her male counterparts. And she was a freelance art director. And at the time, I was the director of marketing for a company called Working Not Working, workingnotworking.com. And it's a professional network that helps connect freelancers for work, mainly in advertising, tech, and design. And I had had a similar job before that. So effectively for the last 4.5 years, I had this really interesting bird's eye view of hiring and discovering that I was more interested in less interested in getting somebody the job and more interested in helping them thrive in the job. And so that experience, coupled with, the discrimination that I had felt at Cannes, and this woman coming to me with this concrete problem of, I don't know what to charge. The Ladies Get Paid aha moment was, let's at least do an event where we talk about money and what it means to us. That is the start of everything. And I did that with no intention of doing another event, let alone a company. But it was after that event with 100 women who came that I thought, okay, there's so much richness here of facilitating conversation between women about money, and then having real education that gives us the tangible, actionable next steps. And for me, my next step was creating a Slack group and inviting everybody into that event. And I'm sure you have other questions, but the beginning of it all was, a personal problem, frustration and anger, and then figuring out how do you use that as fuel, and then how do you focus it? And the focus was salary negotiation. That is how, after that event, it was, this is a way to close our own wage gap. Right. It's tangible. I wanted women to be able to see progress, right? So they didn't just constantly feel depressed and overwhelmed. And then after that, it's all right. You got more money. Now what do you do with your money? You have to grow it. So everything snowballed from there. And now we've got over 100,000 women in our community, and they've exchanged more than 2 million messages in that Slack group that I started in 2016. It's pretty wild.
It's pretty wild. And they're helping each other, and they're helping each other find jobs and business opportunities. And it's an educational platform. I mean, what you've built is really, really massive. Like you said, 100,000 women. And we have so much to unpack from what you said, but I'll tell you something that really impressed me, because first of all, I did experience myself when I used to work in corporate, the same. Now we know it, we have a word for it, microaggressions. And only later on in life, outside of that environment, did I really start saying, oh, wait, that incident, that was just not okay. And that other incident, that was not okay. And that time when my male colleague was sent to Brazil, even though I had been working for 5 months on that deal, and my boss came and said, I'm sorry, we're not sending you, we're sending him, even though he didn't work on the deal. That was just not okay. Like there were so many things that were not okay, right? Or being in a meeting and a male person say, and what do you have to say about this pretty lady? And me being like, what? There's so, but this was the 90s. Okay, Claire, we did not have words for this. Yeah. We didn't have the the chutzpah to even like question it. We just didn't, but more than that, and this is why I'm so impressed by your community, or one of the things that impresses me, more than that, we didn't have a support system, meaning there was a culture that as a Gen Xer, I grew up around. And by the way, my mother is a baby boomer as well. She was a very accomplished attorney, but we grew up in a world that's a little bit different than the millennials, in the sense that we didn't have women looking out for us. We really didn't. Like, it was literally cutthroat, and you were on your own, looking after your own back. And it was just, I mean, everything about it was exhausting, but then that feeling of just being completely alone.
Yes. Yeah.
Which totally. Now, thank God, we have platforms like yours. And obviously the internet also has helped with all of this, right? Where we can really come together and shift the whole modus operandi from competition to collaboration, which is really a female paradigm that the world needed so badly for so long.
Yes, 1000%. And it's funny because, you're Gen X, I'm millennial, but I'm seeing these Gen Z who are looking at me going, wait a minute, there was a time that you didn't consider yourself a feminist. There was a time you didn't know about the wage gap, let alone like an expectation that, things should be equal. So it's very interesting for me to be sandwiched between like two generations that are operating in completely different ways. And I'm kind of like the bridge, sort of part in that, because I'm 35, and then I'm seeing like my half sister is 20, just being like, what are you talking about?
Right. And I guess that's positive.
It is. Except, yes, no, it definitely is. Because they're also not complacent. And that's an issue that happened, in the 90s, and there's other issues why progress stagnated in the 90s. But I think there was complacency that happened where there was so much progress made in the 70s. Again, my mom being allowed into Yale, 1974, women allowed to get credit cards. Wow, so much progress that you assume that that there's inevitability to it and that progress is linear. Definitely not. Actually, it's quite the opposite. There's always a backlash. And so there's stagnation, a backlash, but still we carry this like, wow, it's so much better. And hope. We want to have hope. We don't want to live every day thinking I go into work and it's not a meritocracy and men are horrible. Like, I don't want to live my life like that. I want to assume the best of people. I want to assume that I'm, being paid equally. But the problem with assumptions is the potential for blindness. Right. So it's like, go in with the best intentions, but you just have to be vigilant in having these conversations, because it's only then that you find out information, and information is power.
Right. And we weren't having those conversations. I mean, I'm so glad that this is happening. I mean, I didn't even know to negotiate for my first job at an investment bank. I had no idea. Right. And only later that I realized, oh my goodness, what did I just do?
And also, a lot of people, and myself included, were actively encouraged not to negotiate by our mothers, especially for folks who graduated in 2008, 2009. I was 2009. Jobs were scarce. So that, and I think particularly for millennials, right? 2009 graduation, then COVID happening, when that should be kind of the peak of our earning power, or like the hockey stick of our, how much money we make should happen around 34, 35. So we are just getting slammed twice at these really important parts of our earning capacity. And if you don't negotiate, that's leaving money on the table, but not just for your salary in that year. It's actually for your compounded wealth. And it's for your kids and future generations. But if you're coming at this with a scarcity, this fear of, if I negotiate, I'll lose the opportunity, or I'm just so grateful, right, to have it, I don't even want to like slow this down in any way, just say yes. I understand why we don't as well. So I think if anyone's listening and this is resonating with you, and it sounds like you, don't beat yourself up for it. There were reasons that you didn't negotiate, but now you know better, and so you have to do better.
Exactly. And we have to do better, not just for ourselves, but really for all the women that come behind us, our nieces, our daughters, our friends, right? You definitely have the pulse on what's important to professional women today, and also what their challenges are, being that you lead this incredible community, Ladies Get Paid. What are you finding now, Claire, is of a priority? And I know we've had the pandemic and we had so much shift. So what are the things that are top of mind, and maybe even what are some of the challenges that you are seeing women still struggling with, particularly when it comes to money?
Yeah, that's a great question. Listen, the issues that women had were just magnified and amplified by the pandemic. And so in one way, it's horrible. In another way, it's actually good. Okay. So the worst part about it was the industries and the roles that were hit the hardest by the pandemic, in terms of being fired and furloughed and wage reduction. Those tended to be the industries and roles dominated by women. Okay. Particularly women of color. These were hourly positions, right? So we're talking service workers, retail workers, etc. So there was a real money loss that happened that was very scary. And I hope and think it's coming back. The other part was that when schools were closed or there was homeschooling, women have always been the default caretakers.
Right.
And so their time is now being spent taking care of kids, which either forced them to quit or reduce hours at work. Or they were told, or looked at like, well, you're not as available, or, your potential for promotion has, your attention is elsewhere. So sometimes it was real, sometimes it was an assumption. Now, schools have gone back. So this is the positive part. I think remote work is great. There's issues with it, but a huge concern I had for women in their ability to gain more money and to get promoted was that they needed flexibility, because if they're going to be the default caretakers, regardless of if the kids are at home or not, they still are the ones who are picking up the kids. Right?
Oh, yes.
Ever. So then again, they're looking at, well, if my husband or my partner is making more money than me, and I'm the default caretaker anyway, like, it's a mathematical just as much as sociological question here of, I guess I'm going to be after the one to scale down my hours, or I'm not scaling down my hours, but my employer is looking at me like I might. So let's not gamble on giving, Claire a promotion, right? But with flexible work, remote work, it's not about the hours in the office. It's about getting the work done.
Right.
So that's exciting. Here's where I'm seeing a focus: boundaries. How do I set boundaries in this new world of work when I'm at home? Because it means that you're not going to contain it from 9 to 5. So therefore, is working at 11 p.m. okay? Maybe if you're making up for hours that you lost earlier because you were taking care of your kids, or maybe, is this your perfectionism or your imposter syndrome? Is that the reason you're working at 11 p.m.? So I think there's a real reckoning with, burnout and productivity and boundaries in a way I had not seen before. That's great. I'm glad. I don't want people to have to suffer. It's horrible that we had to hit rock bottom with burnout to get to a place where we're focusing on it, but we are, and that's great. That is also connected to the other thing that I'm seeing, which is, do I even want to do what I'm doing for a living? If my life is so fragile and my energy is, I got to protect myself, well, then maybe I need to not work at a place that has a toxic environment. Or maybe I'm okay with working less hours and making less money because now I'm going to be spending time with my family. Like, I feel like people are taking ownership, taking command in a way that there was a reset that, forced us all to reevaluate. And so I think people are making choices that are better aligned with their values than even just their paycheck. Third part, investing. I'm seeing a lot more women have interest in investing because they saw when the economy went down during the pandemic, the stock market didn't follow suit. In fact, rich people got richer. So the question was, well, why not me? How did that happen? Right. And it's sort of a mind twist too. Like, wait, people are suffering and losing their jobs. Also, there's wealth building, So it's, again, all the bad stuff that happened, I now find to be spurring positive change. So I've decided to feel optimistic, even though, of course, there's still many issues and generational fallout that will happen from the last couple of years.
No, I love that answer. And yeah, it really does make me feel optimistic. I mean, these are really, really important positive changes. And it'll be interesting to see how this, evolves. And hey, hopefully we'll have good news to share as time progresses.
Yeah. I just want to note a contradiction here, because this happens a lot. I see there's nuances to this that don't get captured in statistics and headlines, because I want to even give myself my own sort of nuanced contradiction, which is I'm seeing a lot of women reevaluating kind of the role of work in their life, right, as it relates to their values and their boundaries. And a number of them are, it's not that they're now choosing to do work that's purposeful to them, actually. It's them going, you know what, work is a paycheck, and that's okay. My work doesn't need to be my family. I don't need to love what I do. I just need to know the place it has in my life and then maximize the hell out of my paycheck. So, but again, to my point of it's about taking command,
Right.
and also just taking a holistic look. Because I just, there's, listen, if your wages are not keeping up with inflation, you need to focus on making a lot, you have to make money.
Right.
But the pressure of making money and finding a purposeful career that you love and is fulfilling, that also allows you to set boundaries, that is a tall order. So
Yes.
now we're just asking ourselves, you know what? Maybe a 9 to 5 with a really good paycheck is good enough. Like, I don't need this to give me my like family life. Like that can be separate. So I don't know.
I'm glad that you pointed it out, because I struggled with this, becoming an adult, and really I'm very much I advocate a lot for finding that career path that lights you up, that really fulfills you, that it's aligned with who you really are, right? Like it should not be a contradiction. It shouldn't be that your means of livelihood is here to suck the life out of you. But on the other hand, I do recognize, like you just said, there's a lot of privilege in that, meaning it's not always, it's not an easy thing, and it's not always accessible there. It takes time, and it takes breaking through a lot of the systemic issues, and it takes having a financial wherewithal to take certain risks so that you can actually find that thing that lights you up. You don't find it overnight, right, and still feed your family or bring the money that you need in.
Right. Yep. It's a constant, and it changes with your life circumstances too.
Exactly. So it changes with your life circumstances.
Yeah, like what your priorities were at one point in your life can look completely different when you're, getting prepared to have a kid.
Exactly. And I think, and that, for example, is a big wake up call for so many of us, right? I remember when I started having children, I was like, oh, I don't want to go back to corporate America. I have no desire to play this game anymore. Right. But again, there was privilege there in that decision. I wasn't solo parenting. Right. I was married to a breadwinner. Right. So there's a lot of nuance in this and in the choices that we make. But it's important that we're having the conversation and that we're supporting each other through the process and through that conversation, because that's what we all need to be doing. And one of the things that we sort of touched up on, and I know you probably go over this a little bit in the book, but this dance that we have to play sometimes at work to portray the right image, right? Like we can't be too aggressive. We alluded to this at the beginning when negotiating, right? But even on a day-to-day basis, right? We can't be too aggressive, because then we're the B word and we're going to be penalized. And we also can't be too soft, because then we're going to get run over, right? Or just not be taken seriously, like we've both, experienced, right? So there's such a dance that women have to dance in the workforce to be properly recognized and rewarded that is frankly just exhausting. And I guess I'm asking you, what's some advice that we have that you can give us there? And are things getting better? I mean, I've been my own boss for a very long time. I'm very happy I am, right? Because I don't want to play these games.
Yes, yeah, and you saw a lot of women who wanted to start working for themselves, during the pandemic. Yeah, I mean, and I just want to underscore that for women of color, this is so much worse also, because they have extra stereotypes on top of them. So if you're, you go in to be assertive, you might be looked at as aggressive for any woman, but if you're a Black woman in particular. So
correct. I'll add, in my case, we've started this conversation talking about the Puerto Rican thing and the Jewish thing. I also admit that in my case, I had a lot of privilege because I did not look Puerto Rican, right? So officially I am a white, highly educated woman. So when I came into an interview, I definitely had more privilege than somebody else.
Yes, because it's how you present, which is also why, we say, I mean, everybody's welcome to our programming, but we say, if you are female identifying or non-binary. So if you're perceived as a woman, then Like that's how we all communicate with each other. It's whatever our perception is of ourselves. So I mean, first, you're just aware that this is happening. And oftentimes we internalize and we assume it is our fault, right? When I was being objectified, I immediately thought, oh, is my skirt too short? Am I too friendly? Okay. It's good to be self-reflective, but let's just first acknowledge this is a thing that is happening that has nothing to do with me. Then I want everybody to just kind of check their energy. How much energy and time possibly are you spending trying to contort yourself, right? Is there a better balance to be had? Because, and I get asked this question a lot about, how do we show up as our authentic self at work? Well, what is an authentic self? I don't know, because we have different selves for different things. Like this is like who you are with kids, like is going to be different, from who you are maybe having drinks with other friends or going into work. Like I don't always wear the same thing. It's like you're putting on a blazer. Like this is just how society is. And I actually find it to be a little bit relieving that I can decide like, I'm going to put on a certain hat today. And like, that's who I am. And that's a choice. So I think it's really about figuring out in that presentation, just again, how much energy is being spent and listening to your instinct. And if it feels like you are over indexing as you orient yourself to be what you think somebody else needs you to be versus tweaking and tailoring your presentation as you want it to be, even if it's in relation to them, right? That balance, if you're finding that it's starting to shift, then my question would be, is this the right environment for you? What are some tweaks or changes that you can make? Whether it's having a conversation with somebody one-on-one about something that they said or did and the impact it had on you, or if it's digging into, DEI initiatives at work. I mean, listen, if it's such a toxic environment, it's not worth it. And this is why we should always be networking for other opportunities.
That's why we need to be saving money also. So we have I like to call it an opportunity fund. Everybody likes calling it an emergency fund. And I say it's an opportunity fund because if you need to walk away to another thing, that's your opportunity. That's how you gain opportunity, by having that cash.
Perfect. And that's exactly what this is. Yes. Well said.
All right. So give us some good news, Claire. I think you've given us pretty optimistic news, but when it comes to the gaps, okay, the wealth gap and the leadership gap and the investing gap, are we actually making headway? I think you in terms of investing, you said that you're seeing women are definitely getting more involved, and that's happening. What else is happening?
Yeah, I also realized I didn't answer your question about optimism in the workplace. I'm not feeling great right now. I just think there's a lot of backlash to all of the progress. I mean, we're just seeing it in regards to like abortion rights. I'm gay, I'm married to a woman, I'm in California. Might be that I lose my right to be married to her if I travel to Florida or Texas. So, and again, I think we're seeing that because of progress. Same thing in the workforce. I'm seeing a lot of men saying they don't want to mentor women because they're afraid of like the Me Too or, cancel culture. I haven't fully wrapped my head around I haven't gathered my thoughts on it completely, but I am seeing resistance. I'm seeing resistance, really, unfortunately.
Should all women just go start their own businesses? Like, seriously.
There's definitely a reason to do it. There's definitely, but if we opt out, then like who else is going to be running these companies? We have to, it's like we just go where gives you the best like health of your life, so that you can do things in your life. So wherever you are healthiest, that might not be running a company because you may be so stressed out, literally, it may be easier actually to work for somebody else, even if you're dealing with stuff. I've seen progress. I mean, I don't remember if we've seen, I think investing has really gone up when it comes to women, but the pandemic did a number on our wages, and also again with inflation. So I don't know if any kind of like wealth income gap has been closed or sure. I think, last I saw, everything stagnated. 80s, 90s. Progress has been pretty damn minimal when you look at things holistically. But because I'm not talking about white collar. I'm talking about, again, people who work hourly wages, because that's where the wage gap is. Teachers, nurses, these are the women of color, and those are not appreciated professions. Financially, they're not appreciated. And then there's inflation. So, what happens? And, a huge swath of people in this country are either unbanked or underbanked. They're not even building credit.
Right.
So forget about all the discrimination that can happen when you try to, get a mortgage. If you don't even have the credit on top of it.
Right.
And how do you build generational wealth? It's not just your paycheck, it's all of your assets. People probably are still digging themselves out of the 2008 hole, when it comes to housing. So I don't know. I think things are so up in the air right now. We just need more time to see how things shake out. So there's some reason to be happy. You know what? I'm going to be optimistic. We're talking about it with a sense of urgency that I did not see happen before the pandemic.
Right. Exactly. I love that. Yes, I love that. We're talking about it more and with a sense of urgency. It is really important. Now, there's another side to this conversation. I wonder what you think, which is, yes, we may make headway. Hopefully we are, but at the expense of what, in a sense? And the reason I ask this is because I wonder if there is a need to balance the overall conversation of professional and financial advancement with the fact that women often might have a desire, and it's almost like a natural, I shouldn't say almost, there's a natural built-in desire for women to have a family, to nurture family, to settle down in a relationship, in a committed relationship. What do you think about that? Is there a need to balance this conversation a little bit more? Are we doing a disservice to our daughters?
I think what is doing a disservice is the lack of paid family leave and universal child care, because there are some women who feel like it's a forced choice to take a step back from work for many years because they cannot afford childcare. I mean, it's one thing to not to want anybody else to raise your kids. That's totally fine. And I understand that. But there's also I simply cannot afford it. And again, if you are compared to your partner who happens to make more, then
you're the default, the one who's going to stay home.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's where it's all right, so there's some forced choice here. But the issue that I'm seeing is getting back into the workforce now is really, really hard. And the employer is like, well, you just left for 8 years.
Exactly.
Well, not even that. You left for a couple of months and now I got to on-ramp you back. There's not a good way I don't think employers are particularly supported in how they work with people coming back into the workforce, or how they, re-onboard somebody who took ample leave. There are also, the people who are taking leave tend to be women, right? Either the men are, I don't know if they're either not given leave, right? Because it's just maternity leave, or the men, there's, stigma, if they were to take the leave, or they're just being realistic and rational about it, which is they see that whoever takes the leave is now jeopardizing their ability to get a promotion.
Right.
As they weren't there, building relationships, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where it's not as cut and dry. And there's also no one solution. But the good side about that is we can approach it from a number of angles. Again, if I had to say anything, universal childcare, paid family leave, and then figuring out, how can companies be supported to get folks back into the workforce, just like there's programs for veterans, once they come back from deployment, getting them into the workforce, right? How about families, moms, getting them back in the workforce? Because they may want to, but then they go into super junior position, and that's where a lot of the wage gap actually happens. Yeah, it's because they're having kids and either taking some time off or not, but it's the having the kid part that then just the earning every year, they're losing out. It's called the motherhood penalty.
The motherhood penalty, yeah. And then you go back and they offer you a salary, the same salary you were making 10 years ago on your first job out of college. And you're like, what?
Right.
I have 15 years of experience. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I see it from their perspective, but I do see it from their perspective, just like I'm in favor of remote work, but I do see it from the perspective of losing out on, the importance of FaceTime and building relationships and absorbing other people's knowledge when you're simply physically in the space with them. So there are, downsides and upsides to every part of this. I think that's been a theme of our conversation today. It's you can look at it in a negative way, you can look at it in a positive way, but to just not look at it at all really does a disservice to, quite frankly, more than half of the world's population, because women, we're a marginalized group, but we're not a minority.
Good point. And that takes us, segues us perfectly into my next question, which is, yeah, there's a positive, there's the negative. But again, we are having the conversation, and you are now hosting a podcast with John Hancock. Very cool podcast. It's friends who talk about money. Again, so cool that this is happening, Claire. I don't know what your experience was because you're a little bit younger than I am, but growing up and even in my young adulthood, we were not having these conversations. Here I am having a conversation, hosting a show on this, but friends were not talking about money, which was exacerbating the problem in and of itself, right? Mothers weren't talking to daughters, friends weren't talking about themselves. We weren't getting educated. We weren't learning from each other. It just, the silence and the taboo just bred more silence and more ignorance, frankly.
Yes. Oh yeah, no, we never talked about money at all in my family growing up. I only started talking about money after I had my sexist experience. So again, 2015. So I'm like pretty new to this, but when I started to talk about it and to talk about the wage gap specifically, I mean, no, it was not out there, which is kind of funny. Now, so many articles about it.
Right.
I mean, things have really, really changed in the last, 5 years. No, not talking, but it also used to be illegal to talk about your salary, with your colleagues. So, I mean, I think that fear certainly permeates, the whole thing. And also as women, it's rude. Don't talk about money, it's rude. Whereas I think for men, they were expected to be the breadwinners. Of course, I'm talking about middle-class families, right? So if women were given the option to not work, well, then don't worry about the money. Like that's, so it's, there's a lot going into this. So, and I was a sociology major, so I feel in a way sort of well primed. I'm just forever fascinated by how groups of people connect. And it's really transformative to see somebody go from, I'm never talking about money, I'm scared to talk about it, to then having a very tangible result. Wow, I had this conversation and I'm making $20,000 more because of that conversation. I always say, just decide how much your silence is worth. If by asking somebody else their salary and how they negotiated, you could get an extra 20K, but you choose not to talk about it. Okay, your silence is worth $20,000. Actually, it's not even worth $20,000. It's worth whatever that might be that you put into, high yield fund, whatever, mutual fund. So, and when you put it in those terms, I can see people just go, whoa, okay, like things may still be uncomfortable, but it's just values, like whatever's more important to you, being considered rude or getting rich.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. And by the way, it's not just if you're employed, like, or your first example at the beginning of this conversation, even if you're a freelancer or a business owner, having the conversation about what to charge you might be leaving a lot of money on the table.
You probably are, because if you're already nervous to talk about money, then I'm a little concerned that you're not that confident to charge a lot more.
Exactly. I want to ask about your upbringing, because as you well know, so much of our money story has to do with what we saw and we learned from our parents' home. What was your upbringing like when it comes to money, lessons learned, whether good or bad?
Sure. Yes. Yeah. And I have a master's certificate in behavioral finance and financial psychology. And a lot of our homework was doing, and being an anthropologist in our own life. So going back, interviewing parents, et cetera, and charting it also from like great grandparents, the immigration story, how the Great Depression, impacted them, their beliefs around monies, and then, money, and then of course, behavior. We just didn't talk about it. I mean, here's, again, the thread of like good and bad part. Okay, so the good part is my great grandfather. So he was born very poor in Brooklyn, son of immigrants, but made a lot of money. Great grandfather, ton of money. And then his son, one of his sons, my grandfather, also made a ton of money. So I grew up with this assumption of inheritance. My parents didn't make much. My mom works in the opera. My dad works in publishing. What they showed me was that you can make a living doing what you love. So that was beautiful. So I'm like, okay, I get that, but I also get the privilege of not feeling like I need to save for retirement. I had student loans, so I did have debt, but I didn't have what my wife has, which is poor family. There is no retirement. Like, you better work your butt off for your future, right? Whereas felt like I could take more risks. So the good thing about that is I did take risks in my career that have paid off, very much so. But financially paid off, like I got a really big book advance, like all these things wouldn't have happened if I hadn't taken risks. However, I did not invest my money really until recently. Wow. Because I just thought I'd rather spend my money. Like I don't need to really save because I'm going to get an inheritance. Well, turns out not so much inheritance left over. My grandparents lived to like 92 and spent the money on care, and also I have two brothers. And I learned in school, generations of wealth get lost every 3 generations. So if you're somebody wealthy, you can really track it. By the third, it's not there anymore. So it really was this eye-opening, and I only learned this in the last like year or so of, oh, wow, like I need to completely rethink how I'm saving for the future. I can't keep gambling, nor do I want to, because we want to have a kid in the next year. But it was really like my assumptions, right? Which were assumptions, and circumstances changed, but we were never talking about it. Never. It was only recently that I found out. But I am very glad that I operated off of a privileged assumption, because it did help me take those risks. And I at least found out enough about it soon enough that I can do something about it, unless there's health problems. And that's the issue with, I think, a lot of Americans, is they're like, how do you pay for a catastrophic medical issue? So my brother's a doctor, so I think about that a lot. So everything I'm saying, it's all good until it's not good.
Right.
So I'm fine today. I mean, again, knock on wood, but that assumption of the inheritance really has been very interesting for me to reflect on in the last year.
It's so interesting. I never thought about it, but I might be carrying some of that too. Also,
you just need to know exactly what you're talking. Because again, what was an inheritance? Well, we didn't realize the in-home care. And I think a lot of people are experiencing this, with elder care. We're living so much longer than we had before. So it's like my grandparents and great grandparents, they didn't have to take care of their parents for that long. So there was no assumption that you would need to save that much money, not only for yourself, but also to take care of your parents. So things have only really started to shift, with the boomers getting older and what that has meant. So this is also why I kind of go back to what I said in the beginning of, this is not our fault. Even me, like my assumption of an inheritance, well, I guess that's my fault. No, it makes sense also. It makes sense why I had that assumption, because my mom always said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It wasn't a worry until it became one. And then you have to talk about it. So just whatever, if anyone's having any kind of like, oh shit moments, like just compartmentalize the emotion, put it to the side and go get the numbers.
Yeah.
Like, make it about the math.
The numbers give a ton of clarity. We tend to be so scared about them. And I notice that in women, and I'm like, no. Once you look at them, at least you know exactly where you are, and it'll tell you what action you need to take. But if you keep not avoiding looking at them, you're actually not in control.
No, correct.
Right? We have to look at those numbers. Yes. It's so interesting. I actually did start investing early. I think because I did realize, I didn't know that I should be investing. So my first bonus when I was 21, I went and I invested it. The problem is I didn't know what I was doing, and I wasn't asking questions because I didn't know who to ask. And whoever I asked, the answer I got was, ask my husband. Can you believe it? Well, you know what I mean? And then you would go to this office and this, you know what I'm talking about. This white man behind the mahogany desk would tell you where to put your money. And only like 15 years later, Claire, that I'm like, why? The economy has done so well after 2008. Like, why are these funds that I invested way before the crash, they're still kind of not picking up? And that's when I really learned. And I have to say, I was already in my 30s, like early 30s. I was like, oh, look at all these expenses. I had no idea. And I studied finance. I have an MBA. I worked in finance. I had no idea. I never bothered to look.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, right? You were not alone.
Right. Right. Now, your work is so focused on improving diversity, equity, inclusion, values that really you and I both know that are of primary importance in Judaism. So I wonder if maybe if you think your Jewish upbringing contributed in any way to your zest, to your passion for these values and this work.
1,000% for sure. So I'm from a reformed household. Both my parents are Jewish, but didn't have a bat mitzvah. Actually, my parents gave us the choice, and so I have twin brothers. So one of the twins and me decided not to do it, and the one who did do it, it's interesting. He went to a different school than us. He went to an Episcopalian school that made him go to church chapel every Friday. So sort of his either rebellion or way of being like, well, shit, if you're gonna make me go to this chapel, I'm gonna make you go to a synagogue. So it's pretty funny. But no, I grew up in very like your purpose on earth is to help others, not to the point of martyrdom, but very much like, be purposeful in the work that you do, and also belief again that you can love what you do and make money and help others. Everybody in my family has done work like that, and again, one brother's a surgeon, one brother works in the foreign service and counterterrorism, and then there's me. So my parents in the arts, like we always find something, how are we impacting others is very much a through line to everything that we do. So I but it's also interesting to see how my wife, who grew up Catholic, she also is very oriented towards giving back, but for her, it feels, I think, a lot more like a martyrdom for it. Yeah. Like I need to suffer for it. And we're kind of like, I'm okay with being rich. Like that's fine with me. That doesn't take from anyone else.
Exactly. It doesn't take from anyone else. In fact, that's what I'm here for. Yeah. God wants me to have the money so I can help the world. The more I have, the more impact I can create. Yeah. It's definitely in our core. I get exactly what you're saying. I went to a Catholic school, so I get exactly what I get the contrast. I get it.
It's similar, but different.
Yes. Very much so. Let's talk about some of your, let's talk about both your financial failures as well as your wins, because honestly, there's no point talking about challenges if we don't celebrate or acknowledge, the wins and the growth that also come as a result. When, you talked about this inheritance situation that you kind of had this assumption, but have there been other mistakes or other challenges and other things to celebrate? You talk about your advancement, great advancement on the book. What are some other things that you can share with us?
I think I just had for many years a total fear of checking my bank account because, when I graduated college, I decided to move to New York. I had $300 in my bank account, lived on the couch of my cousin in the Bronx, customer service job, waitressing job. Like I hustled. But every time I looked at my bank account, it was a source of stress. So I thought out of sight, out of mind, which is totally not true. Like it was always in the back of my head.
Yes.
And that right. And it's funny because by the time that same thing with my credit card, I would swipe it and be like, I'll pay off the minimum. Like didn't educate myself about it. Just thought, again, out of sight, out of mind.
Are you kidding me, Claire? You should know that when I went to college, I don't know how it was, but I think in your days it was already legal. But when we came to college, you would get there and there would be like this smorgasbord of credit card companies.
That's how I opened my account. Yeah.
You too? Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Bank of America. They should. I think if they're going to allow them to do that, I think they need to have financial education tents as well.
I don't think they're allowed anymore.
Like that. It's because I just assumed paying the minimum was fine.
Yeah.
I also thought, if I skip it 1 month, what's the big deal?
Right.
Like.
Me too. I had no clue.
And so I got into a lot of credit card debt. But again, instead of thinking, okay, let's like educate myself, I just was like, I don't want to think about it. It actually gets to the point, I finally checked it and it turns out I actually had a lot more money than I thought. I had been going off of this scarcity mindset from the time when I didn't have anything in it. So that was a huge, mistake, not just for my money, but for my own sanity, like all that time spent wasted, just like being afraid. So I would say that's probably my biggest, just not, facing the music, so to speak. And then in terms of pride, I've gotten a lot more comfortable negotiating, which I know sounds ironic because I wrote a book on it, but just because I negotiate doesn't mean I'm comfortable doing it.
Right.
Now, I definitely feel more comfortable. And I think that has to do with owning my value. So having worked on imposter syndrome and like, am I really worth what I'm asking? I definitely think I'm worth what I'm asking, but it's still a struggle, but it's gotten better. So if any, again, I'm with, even though I wrote the book, I'm in it too, still there. learning and improving and also struggling, because as we challenge ourselves, we do new things and there's risk. It'll be a whole other, can I do it? Building the confidence, commanding the dollars, asking for money for things you've never done before. Like this will always be kind of scary, but that also means, you're living big, right?
You're doing the thing, right? Yes. I always check myself, right? When I'm about to respond to that, I'm negotiating and I'm about to respond with the number, right? Should I add 20% more? I always yeah, let me just slap another 20% on top of it. Because I already know the tendency is always going to be to go lower than really where you need to be.
Yeah.
So always check with yourself and say, no, I could slap another 20% here.
Right. And sometimes I like to think of times in the past when I was very, very scared to say a number. But now when I look back at that number, it's so small compared to what I would charge now. So I feel very, I'm very endeared towards my younger self. So I think now project into the future when you're struggling to charge for something or to stand your ground, imagine yourself 5, 10 years, 15 years from now, looking back, feeling again, that endearment. And this number that you say today in the journey of things will be quite small, actually.
I love that. Yes, that perspective. I love that. I want to ask about imposter syndrome because you just mentioned it, and I guess it comes up whether you're traditionally employed or even if you're self-employed like you and I. Does it also come up for men as often, do you think, Claire? What do you think? Is this a woman thing or is it both genders?
I don't talk to men as much, so I don't know. No, I think it's everybody. I think women are probably more inclined to talk about it because we talk about our feelings more than they do.
I hear you.
But here's the thing. I think imposter syndrome can come from not seeing yourself reflected. And so of course you'll question, should you be there? So if there's more men or white men in leadership and you're a woman and you're trying to get into leadership, well, just by the fact that you can't be what you can't see, right? So that's huge. I also think women were socialized to be accommodating, to be nice, to not disrupt. These are things that don't help you get ahead at work. Or you might, back to what we said earlier about coming in and being assertive, but being interpreted as aggressive. So now it's well, how do I act? So of course you're going to have all this imposter syndrome and confidence issues because you're in an environment where it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. And also I think on top of that, there's pressure to be, you have to go above and beyond and to be perfect. And that's just not possible. That feels like you're constantly, no matter how hard you're working, there's always this gap, the goalpost of success is going to keep moving. And so then you're going to keep thinking, again, my fault. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. So it's a lot of factors for sure. So I'm on the fence if women feel it more than men, maybe they just talk about it. I think they do just simply because the environment of work was not built for women. And so contortionism, of course you question, who am I and am I good enough? I mean, you're probably even disconnected from yourself because you're trying to please others. So that's, I always joke, it's get the book, ladies get paid, but also get a therapist.
I love that. Yes, good point. Barbara Hewson Stanley, I'm sure you're familiar with her work. She's been on the show several times and she talks about this idea that, we have some trauma about women who spoke up, they got burned at the stake. And it really made me think, I'm yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Talk about generational trauma. Jeez.
Right. Epigenetics. All right. Claire, I want to wrap it up with what I call Jewish Money Matters, fill in the blanks. And this is a part of the show where I'll give you an open-ended sentence and you'll finish it with the first thing that comes to mind. All right.
Okay.
The first one is, when I give charity, I like to give to
the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And everybody go make an account on Amazon, smile.amazon. Your purchases can go towards a charity. That's what mine goes to. And let's just say they've received a lot from me.
Yeah, no, that's a brilliant point. I'm glad you mentioned it because a lot of people, I'm surprised, but a lot of people don't know that, but everybody should do that. Smile, Amazon. Yes. I'd love to make.
You're not giving extra. It's not like I'm buying a toothpaste and giving money on top to them. That's
right.
Amazon giving money off of your purchase.
Right. By the way, on that, talking about not giving extra, do you tend to I'm very big on systematically, and I found that it's transformed my finances. I know there's a lot of some people think it's crazy. Some people don't. I like go all in on the fact that I feel it's like it's a Jewish thing. I know it's our tradition. It's from the Torah, but like when we give 10% of our income, we definitely get that 10 times, if not more. So I've become like so religious about that. I wonder where you are on that.
My income as a business owner has been way too unstable, especially in the last 2 years. So we had reoccurring contributions, places that we just cut off, which was really unfortunate. But when there's things like certain laws that are being passed, like then it's like, okay, we got to give to a candidate or to a cause based on what's happening. So yeah, but that's again goes like you have to reevaluate kind of where you're at in your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was rough to say we got to get into more scarcity mode recently, but hopefully I think it's going to change.
Of course it is. Of course. Of course. All right. I'd love to make more money because
we want to start a family.
Nice. Something I wish I'd learned about money growing up is
anything.
Anything and everything.
The credit card. Definitely how to use a credit card and how to not use a credit card.
Gosh, yes. I should ask my parents. Actually, I've never really had this conversation. I don't know why. I talk about money all day long, but never asked especially my mother, like, why did you not teach me? You're an educated woman, for God's sake. Like, why? But I think she just lived in this mindset that you just swipe and you just get whatever you want. It's interesting. All right. Credit cards. Just okay. Got it. I got me into a lot of trouble. Money, spiritual or physical?
Spiritual.
Nice. Something I splurge on unapologetically is?
I haven't done it recently, but I have no bones about getting Botox and things like that.
Really? I want to hear more. Talking about my mother, she's like every other call, she's like, so when are you going for Botox?
The best.
You sound like my mother. Really? You're so young though.
It's when I moved to LA 2 years ago. No, I started because I sweat under my armpits and I'm on stage. I mean, now I'm doing it from home, but like I was on stage all the time. Right. And so I started by getting Botox under my armpits to stop the sweating.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And it's amazing and it works and it lasts for like a year and so worth it. And then I just do, my forehead, and it's one of those things that like, it's just the fact that you can turn back time. Like how freaking cool is that? Like I'm a little time traveler on my forehead. So I stopped doing it because we were trying to save money. But whenever I used to get it, I was like, I just felt really obnoxious doing it and I embraced it. It's like
hysterical. I'm telling you, I'm going to call my mother after our conversation. I'm going to say, I'm rethinking this, Ma. She's going to be so happy. She keeps asking me. She's like, it's getting a little late. You have to start when you're young.
I mean, listen, if she wants to pay for it or she wants to pay for money.
That's such a good idea. That's what I should say, right? Since I'm paying for the education of her 4 grandchildren, wonderful kids. So, all right. Which obviously is my responsibility. I'm not suggesting that it's hers. Today, I should ask you first. Claire Wasserman, spender or saver?
Pretty equal, but probably saver now, used to be spender.
Yeah. Same here.
Same. Yeah, spender. I err towards spending, but I really recalibrated, and now I have actually a little bit of fear of spending, which is also not good. So it's interesting to see how like I guess I work in extremes, but just because I used to be a certain way doesn't mean now I can't all of a sudden become this, like I'm trying to figure out the middle ground.
Yeah. No, I hear you. Today I'm most grateful for?
I'll just say that it's almost Friday. How about that?
Oh, yeah. So funny you say that. I was like, Thursday afternoon. I was like, I'm so tired already.
One day closer to Friday. Every time I send an email, I go, happy 3 days closer to Friday. Happy 4 days. So now it's basically Friday. And I'm sure people listening to this, it might be the weekend. So good for you.
Finally, I'm Claire Wasserman, and I believe Jewish money matters because
of future generations.
Yeah. So good. So good. And it matters, yeah, for everybody, Jewish or non-Jewish. That is an answer, a good answer. It's not just yourself, it's about your future,
And your
the
community.
future, the community, those who are coming behind us, right?
Yeah.
Claire, what's next? The book is out, the community's thriving. What is on the pipeline? The
Yes.
podcast? What's
So I
happening next?
submitted a proposal for a second book.
Yes.
And we're actually, so the John Hancock podcast was 2 seasons and it's done. So now I'm developing a podcast for Ladies Get Paid that's going to be in relation to the book, and a whole whole live coach program called Get Into Your Life, showcasing stories of women who've, reinvented themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you want to make a big change in your life, whether it's financial or personal, professional, spiritual, etc., how do you do that? The process of getting started, but also of sticking with it, because that's actually the hard part. So
Yep.
I'm going to be on the other side of the microphone, like you.
Love it. I love it. Claire Wasserman, thank you so much for this wonderful work you're doing. Tell us where we can find you.
Yep. Ladiesgetpaid.com. Ladies Get Paid on all social handles. I'm Claire Gets Paid. And we have a video library of educational resources. So come and, become a member and get access to that. But it's free to join our online community. So yeah, again, just ladiesgetpaid.com. You can also find my book on there, ladiesgetpaid.com/book, or Amazon, or wherever books are sold. Just remember, do the smile.amazon, so you can go start giving a piece of your purchases to fabulous organizations. So,
yes, so important. Thank you so much, Claire. Wonderful work. Thank you so much for coming on.
I appreciate it.